Hello, everyone. GoToWebinar is always very close on my face. Nice to have you all here today. My name is Alyssa Fader. I am the training director here at Emily's List, and really appreciate you all taking your time to join us for our donor research training today. I wanted to give you a little bit of background on what Emily's List is to start us off. Emily's List is the largest resource for women in politics. It is a hub where people like you can come and learn the skills that they need to be successful in their runs for office. So we're really excited that you're all here with everything going on right now and taking the time to learn with us. Since our founding in 1985, we've helped elect over 100 women to the House, 26 to the Senate, 16 governors, and nearly 1,100 women to state and local office, all of which will increase dramatically in this year's election. And we've had over 50,000 women reach out to us and say that they are interested in learning how to run for office themselves, including all of you. So we are really excited to be able to put on these trainings for all of you to help you master the skills that you need and so you can win. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the webinar norms for today, and then I'll come back later to give you even more resources that you can use from Emily's List. The first norm is to invest in our time together. We have a limited amount of time. We have some activities for you all and questions as part of the training. Please put in the time to answer those questions and do those activities. You'll get out of the webinar what you get put into it. The second is that all questions are valid. You're going to type them in the toolbox in your webinar toolbar, and we'll have 2 allotted Q&A breaks so we can get to as many of those questions as we can. And the last is that these slides are internal. So we're going to send you a recording of the webinar after the training, and that way you'll have all this information. So if you feel like you don't have enough time to take notes, don't worry about it. You will be fine. We'll send you the recording later. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our trainer for today to walk us through the agenda and the rest of the training. I'd like to introduce Sarah Carrillo, who is the State and Local Midwest Finance Advisor.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the introduction, Alyssa. So excited to have you all here today to talk a little bit about getting to know your donors. So we'll be doing a lot today. We already did our welcome and walk through some housekeeping. We'll talk a little bit about why donor research is important and then how to do it. We'll also do some practice, like Alyssa mentioned, and then wrap things up with a couple of key takeaways. 2 quick goals for today's training. After today's training, we'd love for you to understand why good donor research is a really important part of your campaign, and then also know how to do it. We want you to know how to search for donors and then find out what you need to about them so that you can take your fundraising to the next level. So to get started, go ahead and drop in the chat box how much experience you have with donor research. Do you have some experience, no experience? Are you very experienced? We'd love to know where you are. I'll just wait for a few seconds. All right, so I'm seeing that we've got folks all over the board. That's great. Really mixed audience here. We'll be covering skills that I hope are helpful for everyone, regardless of your level of experience. First, to start, let's talk a little bit about what donor research is. So donor research is just the process of figuring out who a candidate can call in call time. It's the process of figuring out who they are, but then also researching them. So you have enough details for your candidate, or you, if you're the candidate, to have good conversations with everyone who you're talking to. Donor research is typically completed by staff, volunteers, or interns. This isn't always the best skill for a candidate to spend time investing in because honestly, your time is better used talking to those donors. We'll talk more about that in a second, but this is something that's really important to your fundraising process. Doing donor research is important for a lot of reasons. First, it makes call time more effective. If you have information about your donors, you can have better conversations with them. If you know that someone's child goes to a certain school, you can mention that on the call and build a better relationship. It also helps you find new folks to call. As you're doing research, you'll come across new names of people that might want to invest in your campaign, and just having done that research lets you build a broader audience. You can also build a better ask with your donor research. If you know what a person's giving patterns are and what types of campaigns they invest in, you can make an ask that they'll be able to say yes to. And finally, good donor research just sets a candidate up for success. The more information you have, the better your operation will be. That holds for anything, right? That holds when you knock doors, that holds when you do fundraising. As a quick reminder, donor research really relates to call time, and call time is sacred. 40 to 50% or even more of your budget will typically be raised via call time. So donor research really helps you make sure that that can happen. Like I mentioned a second ago, donor research is a really good skill for staff, volunteers, and interns to focus on. Candidates have a lot on their plate, and donor research is a time-consuming task. If you're a candidate, you really should be focusing your time, on talking to voters and then also raising money to do that, talking to voters. Staff, volunteers, and interns are folks who can learn how to do this donor research and then spend regular parts of their time with the campaign doing regular research. All right, so the first part of our learning today is talking about who you should research, so we'll dive in. If you've done an Emily's List webinar before, you've probably seen these circles of benefit. Has anyone seen these before? Yes, no, maybe? All right, seeing some yeses, some nos, some maybes all over the board again. Love it. So you'll see in the center, as a quick refresher, we've got the candidate in the middle. So that's you. If you're running for office, you're right in the middle. The first circle around you is the personal circle. These are folks that have a direct connection to you. It might be family, friends, people you went to school with, colleagues, people you work with, neighbors, whoever. These are people that know you, trust you, care about what you are doing. They care about your campaign because they care about you, not necessarily because of anything else. They might care for other reasons too, but their main motivation is because they care about you. Your second circle is your ideological circle. These are folks who would invest in the campaign and care about the campaign because they share an ideological belief with you. This could be that they care about clean water in your state. They might care about increasing school funding. They could care about something super specific, like fixing a bridge in your town. These are people who would invest in your campaign because they share a belief with you. Your axe to grind circle is typically smaller than the other circles. It might not even exist for your campaign. But your axe to grind circle is a group of folks who would give to your campaign because they'll be harmed if the opponent wins election. So that doesn't necessarily mean people who just don't like your opponent, people who have something to lose if your opponent wins. I also wouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about your axe to grind circle because it simply isn't there in a lot of places. Not everyone's opponents are evil, so you might not have a huge circle. Your power circle includes folks who give to your campaign because they care about money and jobs. So your power circle will include PACs. They might include those big, quote unquote, big donors in your state that people always talk about. Your power circle really cares a lot about viability. They want you to be the candidate that wins, and they'll invest later on in the cycle. You'll see these arrows that go outward from the candidate that say viability and time. Those demonstrate that it'll take more time to get people invested in your campaign the further from the candidate they are. And then your viability arrow demonstrates that you'll need to have more viability before someone will invest in your campaign. So your next door neighbor might give to your campaign right off the bat because they want to support what you're doing. But a PAC will probably give later on. It'll take a lot of conversations and they won't give until they know that you're the person who will win. So that's a quick refresher on the circles of benefit. We'll be focusing today on your ideological and personal circles. Those are typically the people that you'll spend time doing donor research on. So first, as you think about who to research, consider all these questions. Start by thinking about who knows you. If you need some help with this, I'd really recommend checking out our training center at emilyslist.org. We have a Rolodex lesson in our training center, and this will help you think who is in that personal circle. Who are the people who know you? Who did you go to high school with? Who lives on your street? Who works with your significant other? Do your kids have parents, or do your kids have friends who have parents that you can talk to? Who is in your world? So start there, make a list of those people. Also think about who likes you, who's excited that you're running for office. This might seem obvious, but figure out who those people are. You can also do a little thinking about your axe to grind circle, who dislikes your opponent, who wants them to lose. These could be good donors for you. Also think about the issues that you've championed, both personally and professionally. This doesn't need to be some big, huge campaign. It doesn't need to mean that you've led a statewide movement to change something. It can mean who did you work with when you were trying to get a new park in your neighborhood? Who did you work with on a PTA initiative? Who are you on a committee with at your place of worship? Think about the things that you're involved in and where you've made change and who those people are. I'd also really encourage you to think about legislation that you've supported. That doesn't need to mean that you're an incumbent, although it can. If there are things that you've supported policy-wise, think about who else in your area supports those things. If you really wanted a certain bill to pass, think about who else wanted that bill to pass. They can be people that you know, or people that you don't know. Either way, think about those folks. Also think about the organizations you belong to now and in the past. It can be anything. It can be a book club. It can be a cooking class you took, a yoga class you go to. It could also be a college organization, Greek life. It could be anything. Consider those factors. Consider who was in those organizations with you then, now, before, anyone affiliated in that way. Also consider your political allies. Are there folks that encouraged you to run for this office? They should be in your donor research circle. Are there people who are excited that you're running, who have asked you to run in the past? An important thing to think about. And then finally, always think about who's already contributed to your campaign. You should be doing ongoing research on people that have already given to you so you can make more asks. The best donors to your campaign will always be the people who have already given. So I'd really encourage you to consider what their needs are and what's going on with them so you can continue to have informed conversations. Is there anything else that you think you should consider as you start to flesh out folks to research? If you have other thoughts, go ahead and drop them in the chat box. Seeing lots of good ideas. I'll give you one more second. All right, so looks like a lot of things popped up. Glad you're thinking about it. We'll go ahead and move on. So how do you research? This is an important part. So we've talked about who you should research. Now we'll talk about how you do that research. The first thing you should do when you start to do donor research is to find a system. Here at Emily's List, we love systems, as you might have picked up on. So think about the tools that you're using. If you're using a paid system to track your donors, like NGP or another paid database, you can do donor research directly there. You can also use a spreadsheet. I love spreadsheets, always up for a good spreadsheet, and I'll show you an example in a second, or a combination of the two. So if you wanted to do a combination system, you could do your research on a spreadsheet and then upload it to NGP. Any of those are fine. The system is not quite as important as just the fact that you do have a system. Having a clear system that you can stick with for the duration of your campaign and across volunteers is really important. So everyone who's doing donor research should use this system. It's just really helpful. So we've got a sample spreadsheet here. You'll see on the left that you've got names here. So you'll always include a first and last name, and then the relationship to the candidate. So if it's a family member, drop that there. If it's someone from another part of the candidate's life, your life, go ahead and drop that there. The next section, the part in the middle circle, includes contact info. So where do they live? What is their phone number? How do you reach them by email? Then on the right, you'll see the biography and giving history, which will tell you what to say to that person and then also what to ask for. So the section on the left will typically come from the candidate's universe. If you're the candidate, this is information that you probably already have in your life, or it might be information that you find elsewhere. We'll talk about other ways to find these people in a little bit, but anyone can fill that left part out. The middle part will come from a mix of candidate, staff, and intern and volunteer resources. So if you're a candidate and you always send a holiday card every year, you probably have a list of addresses. Share that with the people that are doing donor research. They can add that information to this spreadsheet and make things a little bit easier. If you're researching folks who you don't have that information for, no problem. We'll talk about how to find it. But that'll go in the middle. And then the right part is the section that a candidate really doesn't need to spend any time on. That's really important for volunteers, interns, staff to focus on. And that's the biography and giving history. We'll talk about finding each of these sections in a little bit, but this is just a good example of what your spreadsheet could look like as you do donor research. Before you research anyone, it's really important to do a quick vet. For anyone who hasn't done that before, that just means that you need to do a quick Google search of this person to figure out if it's someone that you should research at this point in time. So first, refer back to your system and make sure it's not someone you've already researched. You don't want to duplicate your work. Time is of the essence. So if this person's already in your database, move on or update the record, but don't create a new one. Also, you want to make sure this is someone who it's okay for your candidate to contact. Different states have different rules about people who work for the federal government and their ability to give to campaigns. You also want to make sure it's not someone who whose name you don't want on your filing report. So if this is someone who's under investigation or something like that, probably someone to leave off of your donor research list. Once you've done your vet, you have a name that you want to research, you're going to go ahead and just check out what their name is. So figure it out, see what they go by. Do they go by their full given first name? How should your candidate address them? If you're researching a Robert, but they always go by Bob, that would be helpful for your candidate to know. You want to be able to say that to them in call time. So the way that I typically do this is just looking at my initial vet. What do the recent Google hits say? Is every story about them or every Facebook page that pops up, every Twitter post, Twitter tweet, is that using a certain name? If so, you should use that as the name that they're listing. You can also use tools like LinkedIn, FEC, and Open Secrets, which we'll delve a little bit more into to figure out what they go by. You'll also want to look for an employer. The employer is helpful because that gives you a little more context on what this person does for a living, maybe even what they're interested in. You don't necessarily need to mention that during call time, but it's helpful to have. This might be something that pops up on their social media. I know I like to post about my job on social media because I like it a lot. Other people might too. If they've given to a campaign before, you'll see on the FEC page, which we'll talk about again in a second, what they do for a living. So you can find that there as well. The next thing you'll want to do once you know what they go by and who they work for is their address. So I like to do something called strategic Googling, which is really not a specific skill, but gets you where you need to go. So I'll do a combination of keywords that usually includes the full name or what they go by, the state that they live in, and then their address. So if I were searching for myself, I would just type Sarah Carrillo, Illinois, and then the word address. Usually something will pop up. There's lots of tools out there, including white pages, benverified.com, Radaris, Bokeo, a few others too that you might know about or use, that can pop up with addresses. You can also ask common contacts. So if this is someone your candidate or you, the candidate, knows, go ahead and just send them a text and say, what's your address? There's nothing wrong with that. If you have friends in common, feel free to ask them. Use your contacts to your advantage at this point to get information that you need to make your campaign more effective. Phones are a super important part of donor research. The more phone numbers you can find, the better your call time will go. As you all know, having a working phone number is pretty much the key part of doing call time, right? So if you have working phone numbers, then you can get much further than if you don't. Got a couple of options for phone numbers. We'll start with your home phone. Take a look at this GIF. We might forget that we have landlines, but people do still use them, so it's helpful to have a landline number. The first way I do that is with more strategic Googling, not rocket science here. Just searching their name plus the word phone, their name plus the word contact, trying to figure out what that is. If they're involved with other activities in their community, I would check out websites and newsletters that relate to those. So I volunteer at the Humane Society. I know that if I were spearheading a specific project, the Humane Society might print my name and phone number in their regular newsletter. So if the person you're researching does things like that, check it out. Maybe they run something at their church. Their phone number might be in there. Just look at the websites for what they're involved in and try and dig in a little bit to see if you can find numbers that way. Finally, if you know this person, just ask them. If you don't have their phone number, but you need to, send them a quick Facebook message that says, "Hi, updating our campaign records. What's your home phone?" Work phones can also be helpful. You should use your discretion as you add these into your donor research. So, for example, if a person's a doctor, you probably don't want to call them while they're at work. If a person's a teacher, also probably not someone you want to call at work. However, if they work at home, if they are a lawyer or someone else who has ability to answer the phone at certain points during the day and take non-work related calls, go ahead and find it and put it in. If you know their employer, check the business's website. Lots of people put their business numbers on their website. It's easy to find. If you know what they do, but not who their employer is, do more of that Googling. Use their full name, what they do for work, and then where they are. So for me, you would Google Sarah Carrillo campaigns Chicago, and you might be able to find a result that way. If you only know where they live, Google based on that and see what you can find. The work phone isn't essential, but it's helpful to have. Just more methods of communication are better. And then finally, cell phones. Cell phones are really the most helpful tool you can find as you're doing donor research. You'll do a lot of strategic Googling to find these. So I like the combination of the words full name, so their full name, and then the words cell phone and state that they live in. You can also try searching for their area code. If you know where they live, you can do some guessing on what the area code is and try and find it that way. That can be helpful. The word mobile will also help sometimes too, so it's worth trying a combination of those things. I'd also encourage you to refer back to that tip that I mentioned a second ago about looking for newsletters, directories, things like that. Lots and lots of organizations make directories and publish them that include people's phone numbers. So if they're involved in a certain club, organization, professional organization especially, see if you can find that on the organization's website and find their directory. That's a great place to go for phone numbers. Professional organizations especially tend to share phone numbers, and it's definitely worth checking out. Quick note on your phone numbers. Before you share these numbers with your candidate or before your volunteers share them with you, you should ask them to check the phone numbers. Checking phone numbers before the candidate sees them is super important. Can't emphasize this enough. Checking phone numbers increases call time productivity and just makes everything about call time smoother. So what checking numbers means is just that the person researching will dial the numbers before they share them to make sure that they're working numbers. I'm sure many of you know as well as I do that there's a lot of disconnected phone numbers out there. So making sure that it's a working number will just save so much time during call time. If you need to navigate a system, do it now, take notes, to an extension, figure out what you need to do to get it there, and add those notes into your system. You can download an app called SlyDial. Lots of campaigns use that to check cell phone voicemails. This will dial a person's phone number and take you to their voicemail. So you can see if the voicemail message matches what is happening with the number, that it's what you're looking for. You can also just check the voicemail message by dialing the number. People often don't pick up their phones, and so you'll likely get a voicemail. If someone answers, feel free to confirm with a live person that that number is accurate. So you can call and say, "Hi, I'm calling with Sarah Carrillo's campaign. Just wanted to confirm that this is so-and-so's number." It's an easy way just to make sure that you have accurate data. The key here is to make sure that it's a working number and ideally the one that you want. All right, so you've got phone numbers, you've got a name, you hopefully know what they do for a living. We're going to go on to build a biography. Key thing about a biography for donor research is that it's not super long. I like to write, I like to research, so I often get carried away. It's really easy to write 2 paragraphs before you know it. We really like to stick to 3 to 5 sentences for a biography. Use all the resources available to you to come up with a quick, concise synopsis of this person's life that will give the person making the calls an idea of what their donor is about. So I often refer to work biographies if they're available. I would again do that quick Google search, look at your vet, and figure out what's popping up there. That's usually where you'll find the work biography. You can also just scroll through the first 2 pages of results on Google. Your donor doesn't need to be someone famous or well known to get some Google hits. I know lots of folks will be pop up on Google for things they've done in their community or being on a host committee for something or participating in a certain drive, whatever it might be. A community bulletin or newsletter can tell you a lot about what they're up to. I would also just do a quick read through a person's social media page. Depending on security settings, you might be able to see some information about what they're up to lately, if they went on vacation somewhere, if they went to a certain university or college where they lived before. Just figure out what you can glean and then try and pare it down so you just get the most important information to share with a candidate. We'll practice a little bit more later. All right, that was a lot of me talking, but I want to hear a little bit more from everyone else, so I'll turn things over to Alyssa for some questions.
Hello, nice to be back. Hello, Sarah. So we have a couple of questions that you guys have already submitted this morning via text, and also please feel free to keep putting them in the chat box. We'll get to them as soon as we can. Oh, Sarah, your camera's disappeared on me.
All right.
Hello.
We're good.
So this first question is if you could speak a little bit to the expectations that donors have. What do donors want to see from candidates? How can you be consistent in reaching out and making sure they know what's going on?
Yes, that's a great question. So when I'm thinking about donor expectations, the first thing that I think is important is that donors want to be kept in the loop. They want to know what's going on with your campaign, why you're asking for money, what the result is after you get money and you use it, how are things going? So I think the best way to honor someone's contribution is by keeping them up to date on the campaign. So I'd encourage you to send out regular emails to donors to keep them in the loop, regardless of what their giving amount was. I would also encourage you to do regular calls to them. So if someone gave you $50 in January, call them back in March and say, thank you so much for that contribution. Here's what's going on with the campaign. You can also make another ask at that time. Like I said, your prior donors are the people who are most likely to give to you in the future.
Great. The next question is, I'm from a working class background. Can you give any specific advice for folks who might come from a lower income background where they might feel nervous about asking in their personal circles for money?
Yes, absolutely. This is something that we talk about a lot at Emily's List, actually. And it's a really good question. The first thing that I would say is that you can't make assumptions of people and also don't make decisions for them. So I would encourage you to ask people in your network for a contribution, even if you think that they might not be able to. People will tell you if they can't. And you also don't want to decide for them whether or not they'll be able to invest in your campaign. And if they want to invest in your campaign, let people decide their priorities for themselves. The other piece is that if your community is not accustomed to political giving, it's possible that you might be the first one introducing them to that. So explaining the stakes of your campaign, why it's important, and what you're doing, will let people know what they need to know about if they want to invest or not. So I would give people the opportunity and not make a decision for them, regardless of where you live or what type of background you're from. The other thing that I consider too is to think carefully about what you care about and who's in your world that maybe doesn't live in your community. Your fundraising doesn't just need to be in your district. So if you went to school somewhere else, think about who you know from there. If you have family that lives somewhere else, think about their ability to be involved in your campaign. Don't decide for anyone whether or not they can invest, and go ahead and do research on them anyway. So you can go ahead and make an ask of everyone and let them decide for themselves.
Awesome. And I think our last question for now is, how do you handle duplicate or irregular information in your spreadsheet? For example, husband and wife together versus separate, multiple phone numbers or emails, etc.
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, I would just make separate columns for multiple emails. You could say email 1, email 2. It's an easy way to keep track of multiple pieces of information. If you have multiple phones of the same type for some reason, just make more columns. More information is never a bad thing. People in the same household or people who are connected to each other, I would just make a note of that. So you could either put a note in the biography that Sarah Smith is married to Mark Smith, or you could treat those as one contact. So you could put the two first names together and then do joint information in the biography. So have some about both person there. I think whatever makes the most sense to you as the candidate and to your team who's gathering the information is what you should stick with, but the key is just consistency. I think the system itself is less important than the consistency and making sure you're doing the same thing throughout your campaign.
Great. All right, well, that's it for now. I'll be back. And Sarah, carry on.
All right. Thanks, Alyssa. So let's move on to some practice. We're going to walk through a couple of scenarios and I will want input from all of y'all. So if you can get ready to drop some thoughts into the chat box, that would be great. So I'll go ahead and read this biography and then we'll do some work with it. Leslie Knope currently serves as the Midwest Director for the National Park Service. Previously, she served as the Deputy Director of Pawnee Parks and Recreation and as a Pawnee City Councilwoman. She lost the city council seat in a hard-fought recall fight in 2011. Leslie is a lifelong resident of Pawnee, Indiana. She lives with her 8-year-old triplets and husband, Congressman Ben Wyatt. In her free time, she enjoys volunteering for campaigns for pro-choice Democratic women, scrapbooking, and talking to her best friend, Ann Perkins. So if you see here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sentences that tell us about our potential donor, Leslie Knope. So concise biography that tells us quite a lot about what she's up to and what she likes to do. So now that we know a little bit about Leslie, keep her in mind as we talk about giving history, but put her off to the side for a second. So the next piece of your donor history that you're going to research is their giving history. It's important to know what people have given to other campaigns so you can figure out what to ask them for. You want to ask people for something that they'll say yes to, right? So the first place to go is fec.gov or opensecrets.org. These are places that will tell you about what a donor has given to federal candidates and committees. So anyone running for Congress, the US Senate, the presidency, or a federal PAC will have information in here. You also will want to check out their state giving history. The website you'll go to will vary by state. Most states have either a state board of elections or a Secretary of State database that you can search for. And this has information on giving to state and local campaigns and committees. The reason you want to look at both is because people have different giving patterns based on different types of candidates. There's a lot of people that just aren't aware of how important it is to give at the state and local level. And there's other people that are very comfortable giving at the state and local level, but might not do as much federally. That will help you frame your conversation as you think about what you need to share with the donor to get some buy-in from them, what you need to share to show that your race is important. Once you've put together some of that giving history, you've listed out what people have given to other candidates, you've noted that in your spreadsheet, you'll want to formulate an ask. So once you've reviewed the giving history, you've thought about what they give to similar candidates, I would look, especially as you review, for candidates who have backgrounds similar to yours. If someone else has similar occupation or history or is from a certain area, look especially what those contributions are. You can also think about people who are running for similar offices. If a donor always gives $100 to state rep candidates in your area, you should probably ask them for $100. If a person doesn't have a political giving history, I would encourage you to think about their charitable contributions. Hopefully in your biography, you'll see some notes about any charities they're involved in. That's a great thing to include. If they're regularly giving to a specific charity at a certain level, I would make that same ask of them for your campaign. If you don't know what their charitable giving history is, or they have no contributions, think about the relationship to the candidate and what they stand to gain from your election. I don't mean this in a quid pro quo way, but I mean what they stand to gain in terms of having cleaner water for everyone in their state, or having more equitable school funding, whatever it might be. And then formulate an ask based on all of those factors. You should also think about where they stand in the circles of benefit. Often, people who have a closer relationship to you will give more than a stranger, even if the stranger has something in common in your ideological circle. And then finally, it's always better to over ask than under ask. You can always negotiate down, but you can't really negotiate up. It's much easier to say, you can't do $100, no problem. How about 75? But it's a lot harder to say, great, so glad you can do $75. Could you do 100 actually instead? So give people space to negotiate down if they need to. The ask should have a separate column in your spreadsheet. So when you're doing call time, you can just quickly look at the ask and make it without thinking too much about it. So like I mentioned, the ask needs to have a specific written value, should have a separate column in your spreadsheet. If you're using separate call sheets, I would highlight the ask with red ink, bold font, an actual highlighter, whatever it might be. If you're a staffer doing call time with a candidate virtually right now, send a message to the candidate via Slack or Google Chat, whatever, as they're about to make the ask with a reminder of what that should be. Every single prospect needs an ask. You shouldn't call someone if you aren't prepared with a specific thing to ask them for. You're wasting your time and you're confusing the donor because they don't have an expectation of what you're looking for. So with all that in mind, think back to our good friend Leslie, and let's look at her giving history. So in 2016, Leslie gave $500 to Hillary Clinton. In 2018, she gave $50 to her congressman. In recent years, she gave $250 to a small town mayor in her area who's a close personal friend, so in that personal circle. And she also gave $50 to a state rep candidate. So I'm seeing a couple of patterns here. We've got bigger contributions to, well, a bigger contribution to a presidential candidate, a bigger contribution to someone in the personal circle, and then smaller contributions to folks in her local area, but that she doesn't seem to have a personal connection with. So keeping all that in mind, you're running for state senate. What would you ask Leslie for? You're calling her in call time, you need to make an ask. What's the dollar amount that you ask for? Give you a second to think about that. All right, seeing lots of similar answers, lots of $100, lots of 150s. I love those answers. So you've seen that she gives smaller amounts to people local to her. She gives bigger amounts to people that she cares about. And keeping in mind that we always want to over ask instead of under ask. So I think $100 or $150 is a great ask. If Leslie says no, you can always negotiate down. Love that. Sounds like everyone's getting a feel for what you should ask for and formulating that ask. All right, so we've already made the ask, but if we hadn't already, it's important to think about some pitch points. I would always consider what your pitch for each person will be. This can be a separate column in your spreadsheet, or it can just be something that you think through before you actually make the call. Thinking back to the elements of the ask, if you need a refresher on that, check out our training center, quick plug. I would consider your viability. So think about the things within your campaign that make you viable. Have you had recent polling that shows that you're ahead? Did you have a certain number of supporters at your most recent event? Have you raised a certain amount of money? What is it about your campaign that makes you viable? You can really turn anything into a viability point if you need to. So I'd consider what you're most excited about and then frame that as something that makes you viable. Also consider urgency. Why should someone give now? What's going on in your campaign that makes a contribution urgent? That could be a deadline. It could be a weekly goal that you haven't met yet. It could also be an upcoming spend. If you need to buy ads, you need to pay for yard signs, you need to pay for digital ads, whatever. Feel free to share that with donors. That makes giving urgent. And then finally, think about why the donor should care. If it's your personal circle, they should care because they care about you. If you're thinking about your ideological circle, they probably care about the issue that you have in common, so they should care because you'll fight for that. So think about those things as you're doing the donor research, figure out what your pitch will be. And then also, if you're a staffer watching this and thinking about what to include in your biography, consider that pitch and make sure you're including pieces of information that will be relevant to a candidate as they're making a pitch. All right, quick breath. Remember, you'll need to constantly be searching for new donors. We'll cover a little bit more of that as we move on, but finding donors and doing donor research is an ongoing process. You can't ever totally be done with it. All right, some quick takeaways. Donor research should and always will be an essential and ongoing part of call time. The better your donor research is, the better your call time will be. I'd also really encourage you to constantly be prospecting and doing research because that will enrich your finance operation and allow you to raise more money. With that, I will turn it back to Alyssa for more questions.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see you all again, and especially you, Sarah. So very excited to chat with you about some more questions that we've gotten. I want to start off with if you can talk a little bit about how folks can expand beyond their personal circle and get into some of the more ideological candidates for donating.
Absolutely. That's a great question, and I'm really glad you asked that because that leads to what I just said about constantly doing donor research and building your universe. The most important thing to keep in mind for any candidate and any campaign manager, staffer, finance director, whatever your role is to keep everything. I can't emphasize that enough. Keep everything. If you go to an event, not right now, but in other times, then make sure that you keep every program that you get, every list of sponsors, every featured speaker list. Keep everything. If you do a virtual event, take a picture of who was on the call. Make sure you have the list of names of the folks who attended. If you go to a Dem Club meeting, bring a sign-in sheet, ask everyone to sign in on your sign-in sheet in addition to the hosts. Constantly collect names, constantly keep track of who is in the same places as you. Keep everything. Can't say enough about that. I would also really encourage you to think about who has endorsed you and who cares about your campaign, and then look into lists of folks who care about those same things. If you've been endorsed by an organization that functions in your state, go look at their board of directors. Look at who is involved in their most recent fundraiser. Look at the hosts for their most recent event. If a local official has endorsed you, ask them if there's 10 people that they know that you should reach out to. Ask if there's 10 people that hosted a recent event for them that you should reach out to. Just make sure that you're thinking about what the connections are in your world, and then also just keeping track of everything and everywhere you go. I have a stack of paper in my filing cabinet that has a big list of programs from every event that I've attended as a professional. And it's good for donor research.
Great idea. Okay, another question. Sorry, this is a question from a member of staff who's on this webinar. Can you speak to if staffers should be making any fundraising calls or if that should be candidate only? This person is a campaign manager and they want to know if it's okay for them to be calling donors as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I would say that your higher dollar donors, people that you're making a bigger ask of, and that dollar amount will vary for your campaign, but whatever you deem a high dollar ask should probably be contacted by the candidate. Those are people who want to hear from the candidate, and if you're making that big ask, you probably owe it to them to get that directly from the person who's running. However, I think it's a great idea to have staff make some of the lower dollar calls. Figure out what your cutoff point is for what your candidate will ask for, what's the lowest amount that they'll solicit, and then maybe staff can do any calls that fall under that threshold. There also might be folks who a staff member have a relationship with or a connection to. And it's a great idea to have staff take some of those calls off the candidate's plate. I love that question.
Okay, what's next? How would you recommend staying in touch with donors after you lose because you plan on running again?
That's another good question. A lot of good questions. Loving all these.
Mhm.
I would really encourage folks to keep their email lists active. So you definitely don't want to have to do all this donor research again if you're running another time. That's a lot of work and takes a lot of time. So I would send emails periodically, just saying like, this is what's going on in the community. Here's what I've been up to lately. As soon as you launch, call through those folks as soon as possible, talk to them individually, get their support right away. If you have any social media that you can maintain, that's also a great way to make sure you don't have to repeat your donor research. So make sure that you do occasional Facebook posts about things that are happening, occasional tweets, whatever it might be. But keeping your lines of communication open to your supporters, not deleting those, can be really helpful.
Great. I think, and this is more of a long-term question. How do you cultivate higher dollar donors if you're new? What are some great ways of meeting those folks and getting introduced to them, cultivating that relationship?
For sure, for sure. Here's just some basic advice. I would not be afraid to make an ask of anyone. Don't decide for people. We talked about that before. Your donor research will show that people actually give a lot more than you might expect. People don't always talk about what they give financially, but it's there. People care about things just generally, and they'll give money to what they care about. So don't decide for people and do good research so that you can make those asks. Also, honestly, just making sure you have a good hard ask on every single call will take you a long way. I can't say this enough. Asking for $1,000 when you want $1,000 is more likely to get you $1,000 than a non-specific ask. So ask for what you're looking for. People often don't know what it costs to run a political campaign, so fill them in. Let them know what you need to raise and what you'll use it for. So I think that that's a big way first, is by actually just saying what you need and letting people decide if they can help you or not instead of deciding for them. The other thing that I would do is investing in your donor research program, making that a priority, figuring out who on your team can focus on that. I've worked on campaigns before where interns had donor research quotas. So maybe every intern does 100 names of donor research per week, and that'll make sure that you constantly have new people to be calling through. And then finally, making sure that call time is a priority on your campaign, as I'm sure you've heard a million times, will make sure that you're reaching the people that you need to reach. So if you're not doing call time, you're not going to talk to donors. And you don't know who's going to be a donor and who isn't. You can make an informed guess based on the donor research, but actually doing the calls is how you cultivate those relationships. Folks that regularly give to campaigns expect that a candidate will share updates about the campaign, make a specific ask, and will call them. They won't wait for, these donors won't just give organically. They need to be asked.
Great. I think that also goes back to what you were saying earlier around looking at people's past giving history. Big level donors like being big level donors, and that I think is just a great reminder of some of the teachings that you taught us earlier today. Oh. With that, I think that we've covered all of our questions for today. Thank you very much, Sarah. I hope that all of you have had as much fun learning on this webinar as I have. And I just wanted to leave you all with a little bit of instruction on how to access other resources at Emily's List. The first is our training center, which Sarah mentioned earlier. That's trainingcenter.emilyslist.org. It is the place to get worksheets and modules and teachings on basically everything that you need to know when it comes to running for office. We've added a lot of COVID-specific things to it, so please do check that out. It's a great resource for you. I also want to thank our partners, without whom these trainings would not be possible. They're extremely important for making sure that our programs can continue and support all of you. And with that, enjoy the rest of your day and elect women. Thanks, guys.